life, some moments seem ordinary, yet they open the door to a truth powerful enough to change everything. Ryan Miller, an ordinary delivery driver in Seattle, only wanted to finish his last route in time to pick up his son after school. But the moment he stepped through the nearly 3-meter-tall wooden doors of the Whitmore estate, he froze. Right in front of him was a portrait of a young woman. That smile, those eyes, and the tiny beauty mark on her left cheek. It was Lily, the wife he had buried 3 years ago. But beneath the painting, the name engraved was not Lily Miller. The golden plaque gleaming under the lights clearly displayed a completely different name. Lillian Whitmore, the daughter of a billionaire family. In that moment, Ryan felt as if his heart had fallen out of his chest. The woman he had once loved with all his soul turned out to have never been the person he thought she was. And the story of her life was only just beginning. Ryan stood frozen in the grand foyer, where the warm yellow glow from the crystal chandelier spilled onto the cold marble floor. The only sound in the vast space was his own breathing, heavy and uneven. He walked toward the portrait, each step feeling like he was treading on thin ice. The closer he got, the tighter his chest became. That wasn't someone who merely looked like Lily. That was Lily. Every contour of her face, every angle, even the tiny beauty mark on her cheek, the one he used to gently touch while she slept, all of it was the same. But in the painting, she looked younger, more elegant, as if she had stepped out of a world he had never belonged to. At that moment, a voice sounded from behind him. "What are you doing in my house?" Ryan jolted and turned around. A woman stepped out from the left hallway, around 40, tall and slim, with eyes sharp enough to cut straight through him. Her hair was pulled into a tight bun, her attire all black, radiating the commanding presence of someone who had led a corporation for far too long. She looked at Ryan, then at the portrait behind him. In an instant, her expression shifted from cold to deathly pale. "Lillian," she whispered it, the word stuck somewhere in her throat. Ryan blinked. "No, that's Lily, my wife." The woman stepped back, as if someone had just pulled all the air out of the room. "That's impossible. Lillian Whitmore cannot be dead. She's missing." In that moment, Ryan understood. The portrait was only the first door. Behind it lay an entire world of secrets Lily had hidden, and he was about to face it all. The air in the foyer seemed to freeze. Ryan remained standing there, one hand gripping the strap of his delivery bag, the other trembling slightly as he pointed at the portrait. The woman before him, who moments earlier embodied sheer power, was now truly shaking. She stepped back 1, 2, 3 steps, as if Ryan had just said something utterly unacceptable. What did you just say? Your wife?" "Yes," Ryan answered, his voice turning hoarse. "Her name was Lily Miller. She's gone. 3 years ago." Vivian Whitmore clutched the edge of a nearby walnut table. Her lips, pale and tense, opened and closed as if she were trying to form words but couldn't define the pain rising inside her. No, that's impossible." She shook her head repeatedly. "Lillian has been missing for 13 years. Police, media, private investigators, none of them could do anything. Nobody. No trace. Her voice cracked. "I spent all those years hoping she was still out there somewhere, living a better life, and now you're telling me she's dead?" Ryan took a deep breath. He never got used to talking about this. "Car accident. Drunk driver, she..." passed immediately. Vivian raised a hand to her mouth as if afraid a sob might escape uncontrollably, but her shoulders trembled, each shudder distinct and heavy. "Oh God," she whispered. "Lillian, my little sister, was living in this very city under a different name, and I never knew." A tear dropped onto the marble floor, then another. Ryan stood there unsure what to do. He had never seen a stranger grieve this deeply for Lily, but this grief was real, not fabricated, not performed, not driven by any agenda except the raw pain of losing family. In that moment, Ryan realized something that tore at him. He wasn't the only one who had lost Lily. Vivian had lost her long before he ever did. And this truth was only the first door that had just begun to open. A moment later, Vivian motioned for Ryan to follow. The two of them walked through long hallways lined with cedar wood, the warm, dim light reflecting off the walls like something out of an old museum. Every step echoed heavily, as if dragging along an entire past Ryan had never known. She led him into a small sitting room overlooking Seattle's damp garden. Dark golden leaves swayed gently in the drizzle, creating a hazy atmosphere suspended between past and present. Vivian sat down, though her back remained straight. Her sternness had returned, though no longer as cold as before. She drew a deep breath, as if preparing to say something she had held in her chest for far too long. "My family is not normal." She looked directly at Ryan, her gaze unwavering. "People from the outside think we're the model of American success. Billion-dollar wealth, the biggest biotech company in the Northwest, praised by the media." Vivian paused. A faint, hollow smile flickered on her lips. "But behind all that is a family where freedom barely exists." Ryan stayed quiet. He didn't yet understand what she meant. Vivian continued, slow and heavy. "My mother controlled everything. What we ate, what we studied, whom we met, even which emotions we were allowed to express." She looked toward the rain-blurred window. "We were taught how to stand, how to speak, how to smile, but never allowed to choose how to live." Ryan felt a chill crawl down his spine. The luxury he had seen in this house suddenly felt suffocating. Vivian placed both hands on her knees, gripping tightly. "Lillian, my younger sister, was the only one who rebelled." Her voice trembled slightly. "She wanted normal friends, wanted to love a normal man, wanted to live a life without surveillance. But my mother..." She stopped, swallowing hard. "She saw every choice we made as assets to be protected. Lillian fell in love with a man of a different status, and my mother threatened to destroy his life if she didn't end it." Ryan clenched his fists. His heartbeat pounded louder and louder. Vivian met his eyes and spoke the most brutal truth. Lillian refused to bow. She packed a few belongings, withdrew every dollar she could, and ran away from Seattle. That night, she disappeared from this world as if she had never existed. A cold breeze swept across the garden. The sound of rain tapping against the glass felt like a sorrowful confirmation of the story. Ryan swallowed hard. In that moment, he understood that Lily hadn't just run away from a wealthy family. She ran to survive, to be loved, to be free, to be herself. And he also understood the love Lily gave him was something she paid for with her entire life. Vivian's story made the room feel smaller. No more sound of rain, no more wind. Only the pounding rhythm of Ryan's heartbeat in his chest. He looked down at his hands, trembling in small waves, as if his body didn't know what to do with the shock crashing into him. Lily, the woman he loved. The one who stayed up all night with him when Caleb had a fever. The one who loved the smell of lavender. The one who laughed at the tiniest things in life. She had been running her whole life. He exhaled sharply, bracing his hands on his knees, trying not to fall apart. She never told me anything. His voice was so soft it felt like the rain outside could sweep it away. Vivian looked at him, her eyes still red. Ryan, she didn't tell you because she wanted to protect you. Ryan lifted his head, his eyes red, and stared at Vivian in confusion. Vivian sighed, her voice tight but sincere. If my mother knew Lillian loved you, she would have done everything in her power to destroy your life. She already did that to the man Lillian loved before, and Lillian knew it too well. Ryan closed his eyes. Each word felt like a small blade slicing into his heart. Not because he blamed Lily, but because he realized he had never seen the fear behind her eyes. He remembered the times he gently asked, "Do you not have family?" Lily would simply smile, place her hand over his. The past doesn't matter, only our present. Back then he thought she was just sad. Now he understood. She had been pleading with him not to dig deeper, because any bit of curiosity could bring those dangerous people back to destroy their lives. Ryan pressed a hand to his temple, struggling to steady himself. He wanted to be angry at someone, but he couldn't be angry at Lily. Not at someone who sacrificed her identity, her youth, her family, just to live a peaceful life beside him. A sigh escaped him, sharp enough to hurt. Lily gave up her entire world just to have me. And I didn't even know. Vivian softened. No longer the powerful woman from a billion-dollar corporation, she was now simply a sister, grieving, facing a man who was grieving. You're not at fault, Ryan. She chose you. She wanted freedom with you. Tears gathered at the corner of Ryan's eyes. One drop fell onto the back of his hand, and he understood. From this moment on, his life would never be the same, and everything he thought he knew about Lily would have to be seen again from the beginning. Vivian was still silent in her own grief, but Ryan was drowning in another kind of heaviness, a pain that belonged not only to him. He inhaled deeply, lifted his head, and said something he had been holding back since the beginning of their conversation. I have someone else who needs to know about this. Vivian frowned, not understanding. Ryan swallowed slowly, his voice dropping low. My son, Caleb. He's 6. The room fell into instant stillness. The silence wasn't from shock, but from the weight of everything unfolding at once. Truth, loss, hope, and a newly ignited thread of bloodline. Vivian whispered, as if afraid the question might crack open something too large. Lily had a child? Ryan nodded, eyes reddening. He looks a lot like her. He took his phone from his pocket, his hand shaking so much he almost dropped it. Ryan opened a photo. Caleb smiling brightly under the sunlight, dimples showing, soft curls just like Lily's when she was young. He turned the screen toward Vivian. Vivian looked at the photo, and her entire world seemed to collapse and rebuild itself in the same breath. Her eyes widened, her hand rising to her mouth to hold back a cry. Oh my God, he's Lillian in miniature. Tears fell, slow, heavy, as if each drop carried a full year of longing. She reached out with trembling fingers to gently touch the screen, touching it as if pressing any harder would make the image disappear. She had a child. And I never knew. Ryan didn't interrupt. He understood this pain. Losing a loved one once was hard enough. Losing them twice was unbearable. Vivian lowered her face, her voice so choked it barely formed words. Lillian once told me she wanted to be a mother, but my mother forbade it. She believed a child would distract her from the path of inheritance. She paused, wiping her tears, though the more she wiped, the more they fell. And yet she still became a mother, still brave, still living the life she longed for. Ryan tightened his grip on the phone, as if holding Lily's memory through the image of their son. He spoke softly but firmly. Caleb is my everything, and he's the only part of Lily I have left. Vivian lifted her head, her eyes blurred with tears. No, Ryan. She shook her head, a painful smile tugging at her lips. The boy. He's also the part of her that I have left. And in that moment, something bound them together. Not the prestige of the Whitmore name, nor the tragedies that had unfolded, but the shared love for a woman who was gone forever. A woman who left a void in both their hearts, but also left Caleb like a small guiding light, leading them to find each other. Ryan left the Whitmore estate that day with a heart heavier than when he walked in. The things Vivian had told him kept echoing in his mind like voices from a world Lily had once fled. Power, control, forbidden choices, and the mother capable of destroying the life of anyone who dared touch her daughter. That night, Ryan looked at Caleb sleeping in their small apartment, the soft yellow light falling across the boy's face. He clutched his stuffed dinosaur, eyelids fluttering gently with each breath. Watching him, Ryan felt two realities collide. The wife he loved, who had lived in fear, and the innocent child before him, a child who carried her exact eyes. He knew what he had to do. He had to be sure everything he'd heard was true, even if that truth carved another crack into his heart. The next morning, Ryan called Vivian. She picked up so quickly he thought he had dialed the wrong number, but no, it was her. Maybe Vivian had been waiting for that call all night. He said it plainly. He needed certainty. He needed a DNA test to determine the relationship between Vivian and Caleb. And surprisingly, Vivian didn't react like someone who felt insulted. No anger, no refusal, just a long, trembling breath, followed by a sincerity so raw, Ryan didn't know whether to thank her or pity her. I understand. I'll take care of everything. Caleb doesn't need to come to the estate. I'll have the lab come to your home. 3 days later, just as Vivian promised, a lab technician arrived at the apartment door. Caleb sat perched on the kitchen chair, legs swinging, munching cereal, eyes wide with curiosity at the testing kit as if it were a new toy. In seconds, the swab was done. Caleb giggled. That was easy. Ryan tried to smile, but his chest felt like stone. Vivian stood silently at the doorway, her hands clasped tightly, unable to hide the tension that was stretched thin, like a string about to snap. Then the technician left, carrying something that could change the rest of 3 lives. Vivian stared at the floor, her voice faint as wind passing through. I don't even know what I should hope for anymore, Ryan. But truthfully, Ryan didn't know either. He feared the result would be positive, because that meant Lily had hidden an entire world from him. And he feared it would be negative, because that would strip Vivian of the last connection she had to the sister she loved more than life itself. The truth is often cruel, because it chooses no side. It simply is. 7 days later, the envelope sat in Ryan's hands as he sat in his car outside Caleb's school. His hands trembled as he tore open the thin paper. The printed lines looked cold and sharp as a blade. Conclusion: the two individuals share a biological relationship consistent with aunt-nephew. Probability 99.9%. He shut his eyes, feeling as though someone had pulled the emergency brake inside his chest. There it was. All of it was real. Lily was truly Lillian Whitmore, and Caleb was the biological nephew of the woman waiting for his call. He dialed Vivian. She picked up instantly. Just the two words, "Ryan?" told him she was holding her breath. He spoke slowly, low, as if each word might reshape the world again. "The results are in." A long silence fell. Then Vivian asked, her voice nearly breaking, "And?" Ryan swallowed hard. "Caleb is your nephew. 99.9%. On the other end, Ryan heard a small, choked sob, raw and honest. Not the cry of a powerful woman, but of a sister who had just found the nephew she never knew existed for 6 years. "Thank you." The words were so soft they felt like they dissolved into the air. "Thank you for telling me." And from that moment on, none of them could ever return to the life they had before. Because the truth, once revealed, changes everything. The DNA results felt like a deep incision, splitting in half the already fragile life Ryan was trying to hold together. He sat in the car for a few more minutes, needing time for his heart to catch up to the truth. When Caleb ran out of the preschool gate wearing his green dinosaur backpack, Ryan crouched down and hugged him tightly. The boy's warmth kept him grounded, but it also made the pain sharper. Lily was gone, and everything he thought he knew about their marriage was now just a small piece of a much larger picture. That afternoon, while Caleb was coloring in the living room, Ryan sat curled up by the window, the dull Seattle light filtering through the curtains. He opened his phone, staring at Vivian's name and his contacts, unsure how to begin. But he owed her the truth, and she owed him the stories Lily never told. When he sent the message, "We need to talk," Vivian replied almost instantly with a single line, "I will prepare everything." About an hour later, Ryan arrived at the Whitmore estate again. The air was still elegant and quiet, but this time it didn't feel as foreign. Vivian opened the door. No makeup, no powerful coat, just a woman carried by grief, just like him. She led him into another room, smaller and warmer, where a wooden table was filled with dusty boxes of keepsakes. "I found these," she said, her voice hoarse from crying. "These are all that's left of Lillian, before she disappeared." Ryan sat down, his hands tightening as Vivian opened the first lid. On top were photo albums. Lillian at glamorous galas, Lillian in piano class, Lillian smiling bright beside a birthday cake in a golden-lit room. Ryan didn't recognize her in these photos, not because she looked different, but because she looked too different. Elegant, flawless, like a perfectly trained product of the elite. But as they reached the last pages, something changed. Her smile looked forced, her eyes dimmed, her hands were stiff in expensive dresses that didn't suit her. Ryan paused at a picture of Lillian standing beside their mother, a woman with the aura of cold steel, her hand placed on her daughter's shoulder without a hint of affection. He felt suffocated, as if he were being forced into that perfect mold himself. Vivian exhaled, releasing years of buried torment. She never belonged to this world. She was born here, but her soul wasn't. I knew it, but I didn't protect her. Her lips tightened, fighting to keep her voice steady. I thought my mother was right. I thought Lillian was just rebelling. I thought she'd come back, but she really ran. They continued sorting through the items: a torn movie ticket, a cheap bracelet, a small slip of paper reading, "I want to be free at least once in my life." Ryan touched it, and his chest tightened painfully. Among all the luxurious things, it was the simple, ordinary, inexpensive pieces that felt like the Lily he knew. Finally, Vivian took out a small, brown leather journal. Her hands trembled. This is the one thing I've never been strong enough to open since the day she disappeared. She placed it in Ryan's hands. But maybe you should read it with me. They sat a little closer, two people who shared nothing in common except one thing. They had both loved a woman who vanished from their lives in two different ways. When Vivian opened the journal, the first pages were filled with gloomy notes, complaints about schedules, about unreasonable rules, about the suffocating house. But the more she read, the softer her voice became, and when they reached the final page, both of them froze. Neat, thin handwriting stretched across the center. I met someone. He doesn't know who I am, and for the first time, I don't want to be anyone else. He sees me, not the Whitmore name, not the money. For the first time in my life, I feel real. If my mother finds out, she will destroy him. I can't let that happen. So I choose love. Ryan set the journal down, covering his face with both hands as his breath caught. Vivian released the page and cried softly beside him. There was no distance now, no social divide, no Whitmore family or delivery driver. In that moment, only two hearts were sharing the same wound, and a truth that could never be erased. Lily gave up an entire world to choose Ryan, and even though she was gone, that choice lived on. In Caleb, in Ryan's pain, in Vivian's tears, and in this room full of memories, where the past and present had finally found each other. When Vivian closed the journal, the room grew so quiet they could hear the rain tapping against the window glass. They still sat beside each other, close enough that one person's breath could be felt on the other's shoulder. What they had just read felt like a gust of wind tearing through every layer of defense they had, exposing the most fragile corners of both their hearts. Ryan was still bowing his head, his fingers interlaced as if trying to hold on to the last strand of composure. Vivian sat next to him, her eyes red from tears, but for the first time since he met her, her gaze was no longer the gaze of a powerful, wealthy woman. It was the gaze of a sister unraveling, and of a woman devastatingly alone. You know, Vivian spoke, her voice as soft as a passing breeze. For 13 years, I thought my sister was selfish, leaving the family, leaving me, leaving everything, just for some stubborn love. She drew in a thin breath, her shoulders trembling. But it turns out, the selfish one was me. I never once asked what Lillian wanted. Ryan looked up. In his eyes was an understanding Vivian never expected. She didn't leave you, he said, voice rough but warm. She ran to live, to breathe, to be who she wanted to be. Tears rolled down Vivian's cheeks again, but this time they weren't born of despair. They were released. A long-avoided confrontation with herself finally broke open, And then, in a silence thin as mist, Ryan reached out and placed his hand gently over the back of Vivian's hand, a gesture of shared grief, light but real. Vivian looked down at his hand, touching hers. She didn't pull away. She didn't flinch. She simply let it stay, then closed her fingers around his. Just a little, but enough to make Ryan's heart stop for a beat. Their loneliness seemed to merge, subtle but undeniable. Ryan swallowed the tightness in his throat, and in the attempt to steady himself, he leaned slightly closer, close enough that Vivian's warmth brushed across him in a way that felt dangerously natural. Vivian leaned in too, very slightly, as if by instinct. Their eyes met, longer than necessary, deeper than either of them should allow. In Vivian's eyes, Ryan saw something he had been trying to avoid. Understanding, loneliness, pain so similar to his that it made him want to pull her close so neither of them had to carry it alone. And in Ryan's eyes, Vivian saw something she hadn't dared to admit. He wasn't just Lillian's husband. He was a good man, gentle, with quiet depths that drew people toward him. They still didn't speak. They just moved closer. The space between their faces vanished quickly, close enough that Ryan could see the golden flecks in Vivian's eyes, and Vivian could hear the uneven catch in his breathing. They were so close. Just one more tilt, and their lips would touch. One breath, one heartbeat, one disoriented moment. Then Ryan jerked back as if burned, springing to his feet so abruptly the small table shook. The journal fell onto the carpet, flipping open to the final page like an unforgiving reminder. Vivian startled too, covering her mouth, her face flushing with embarrassment and shock. "No." Ryan shook his head, stepping backward. I can't do that." Vivian lowered her face, her voice cracking. "I'm sorry. I don't know what I was thinking. This is wrong. So wrong." "Yes," Ryan said, voice thick. Lillian, my wife and your sister, He stopped, eyes squeezing shut. "I feel like I'm betraying her again." Vivian clenched her hands into fists. "I know. I feel it too." She forced a weak, heartbroken smile. "We just lost her all over again. Maybe we were just desperate to hold on to something." Ryan stayed silent, because she was right. But the truth didn't ease the burning shame in his chest. He reached for his coat. "I should go. I need time." Vivian didn't stop him. She only nodded, unable to look directly at him. Ryan stepped out of the memory-filled room, down the endless hallway, and finally, out of the estate. When the door shut behind him, the emptiness hit so hard he had to lean against the wall to stay upright. They had come dangerously close to crossing a line neither of them truly wanted to touch. But the moment had happened, and it left a mark that would not fade easily. A mark they would both have to face, whether they wanted to or not. The 3 weeks that followed passed like an endless stretch of fog. Ryan tried to return to his everyday life, but everything felt twice as heavy. Every morning he still took Caleb to school, still went to work, still smiled politely at customers. But at night, when Seattle sank into thin rain and the streetlights shimmered on the wet pavement, he felt lost inside his own life, a life he once believed was stable. One question kept circling in his mind. Why did I almost kiss Lily's sister? He couldn't forgive himself. Each time he remembered that moment in the sitting room, his heart jabbed like someone pricking the same spot with a needle, slow, steady, and painful. Vivian disappeared from all contact. No calls, no messages. The texts she sent during the first week, "I'm sorry. I hope you and Caleb are okay. If you need anything," felt like leaves falling into water, sinking quietly until they vanished. Ryan didn't reply to any of them, not out of anger or resentment, but out of fear. Fear that if he opened that door again, their emotions would pull them both into a depth he wasn't ready to face. But what hurt most wasn't his silence. It was Caleb's eyes. One night, while the two of them ate macaroni at the dining table, Caleb suddenly looked up and asked in his tiny voice, "Dad, why doesn't Aunt Vivian come anymore?" Ryan froze. Caleb looked down, fidgeting with his little blue spoon, lips pressed together as if, even at 6 years old, he sensed he was asking something he shouldn't. Did I do something wrong, Dad?" Those words stabbed straight into Ryan like a spear. He pulled his chair closer and placed a hand on his son's shoulder. "No, Caleb. You didn't do anything wrong." The boy looked up, eyes identical to Lily's, clear, sad, full of love. Ryan's chest tightened painfully. "Aunt Vivian is just busy," he said, knowing he was lying. "She has a lot to take care of." Caleb nodded, but the smile didn't return. Ryan understood. Caleb didn't love Vivian because she was a kind adult, but because even if he couldn't express it in words, Vivian held a piece of Lily, a piece the boy longed for, even without remembering much of his mother. That night, after Caleb fell asleep, Ryan sat alone on the sofa, the TV screen glowing faintly while he watched nothing. In the small apartment, the lavender scent he used to remind himself of Lily overwhelmed him. He lowered his head into his hands and released a long, exhausted breath, one he felt he hadn't taken properly in 3 weeks. Across the city, in the second-floor room of the Whitmore estate, Vivian stayed awake as well. On her desk lay Lillian's journal, open to the final page, the page she had read dozens of times. She touched the words, "I choose love," and tears fell again. Vivian hadn't let herself fall for anyone in years, not because she didn't want to, but because she didn't trust anyone. But Ryan was different. He didn't demand, didn't take advantage, didn't resent. He just hurt. And it was precisely that shared hurt that had pulled them too close, too fast, too dangerously. Every night, Vivian walked into the sitting room where they had once sat shoulder to shoulder, reading Lily's journal, the room where they had nearly lost their judgment. She sat on the same chair, held her head in her hands, and whispered words only she could hear. "Lillian, will you forgive me? I was just so lonely." The room answered only with silence, the silence of the past, of years of loss, of a shadow no one could reach. By the 3rd week, Ryan began doing something he himself didn't understand. Whenever he passed through Medina for deliveries, he unconsciously slowed down near the Whitmore estate gates. He didn't stop, didn't ring the bell, just glanced before driving on. But even seeing the gate made his chest ache, as if looking at a door he still wanted to walk through, but didn't dare to face. Meanwhile, Vivian spent night after night opening her phone, staring at Ryan's name in her contacts, placing her finger over the call button, only to pull it away again. She couldn't bring herself to risk hurting anyone anymore, especially Ryan, and especially Caleb. Both of them were running from their own hearts, but both knew running wasn't a solution. It only stretched the pain out, made it quieter, deeper, and harder to heal. Until one Sunday morning, a day neither of them expected, when fate would pull them back together in a way they could no longer avoid. That Sunday morning, Seattle rarely had sunlight. Soft golden light passed through thin clouds and reflected on the surface of Lake Washington, making the whole city seem to breathe more slowly and calmly. Ryan woke earlier than usual. He stood in the kitchen making coffee, but his hands trembled slightly, his mind still heavy with the weight of 3 weeks of unresolved silence. After a long moment, he walked into Caleb's room and found the boy curled up in his blanket, eyelashes fluttering like he was having a gentle dream. Looking at his son, the ache of missing Lily hit harder than it had in days. He sat on the edge of the bed, gently brushing Caleb's hair. "Today," Ryan whispered, as if asking himself, "we'll go visit your mom, okay?" Caleb opened his eyes, blinking in confusion for a few seconds. Then a slow smile spread across his face. "Really, Dad?" Ryan nodded, swallowing the tightness in his throat. "Really?" A little while later, the two of them got into the car. Caleb hugged his green dinosaur toy, resting his chin on it as he watched the scenery through the window. Ryan drove along the lakeside roads, the wind carrying the scent of water and damp wood typical of the Pacific Northwest. Every time he came to this cemetery, his heart felt both pain and peace. Pain from loss, peace because here, Lily felt closer. When the car stopped, Caleb jumped out and ran toward a large maple tree. "I remember the way, Dad." Ryan could only smile sadly. They strolled across the soft grass, each step brushing against memories. Lily's grave lay beneath the maple canopy, where sunlight filtered through the leaves, creating shimmering patches on the granite stone. Caleb knelt first. He touched the name Lily Miller with his tiny hand. "We're here, Mom." The simple, innocent words made Ryan turn away for a moment, afraid Caleb would see his eyes turning red. He sat beside his son and placed a bouquet of lavender on the grave, Lily's favorite. "Hi, love," he whispered. I'm sorry it took me so long to come back." And right then, footsteps sounded behind them. Ryan turned. His heart nearly stopped. Vivian stood a few meters away, holding a bouquet of white flowers. She wasn't wearing business clothes, no makeup, no armor of power. Just a woman carrying a heart full of wounds. The breeze swept her hair gently to the side. In that moment, she looked both fragile and strangely strong. When Ryan stood, they simply stared at each other for a few seconds. No words needed to convey how heavy the past 3 weeks had been. Vivian spoke first, her voice so soft the wind almost carried it away. I'm sorry. I didn't know you two would come today. She tightened her grip on the flowers. I just wanted to visit her. Ryan inhaled deeply. It's okay. You don't have to leave. Vivian shook her head gently. No, I want to stay, if you'll let me. Caleb turned around, his clear eyes widening. On Vivian! He ran to her and wrapped his arms around her legs. Vivian staggered slightly from surprise, then bent down and lifted him into her arms, holding him close. Hi, sweetheart, she whispered, and tears spilled instantly as she felt the warmth of the child carrying half of Lillian's soul. The three of them approached the grave together. Vivian knelt opposite Ryan and Caleb, placing the white bouquet onto the stone. She touched Lily's name, her lips trembling. You know, Lillian, she whispered, I searched for you for 13 years. I thought you were angry with me, that you saw me as weak. But now I understand. Her voice cracked. You just wanted to live your own life. She lowered her head, tears falling onto her hand resting on the cold stone. Ryan watched her, and in that moment, he no longer saw her as a Whitmore daughter. She was simply a sister who had lost the person she loved most. "Lily?" Ryan murmured, eyes fixed on the grave. I'm sorry. I avoided the truth. I avoided your sister. I was just scared." He paused, fighting for breath. "Scared you'd think I was betraying you." Vivian looked up, her eyes shimmering. "Ryan, she would never be angry with you." Then Caleb spoke, voice clear and bright. "I think Mom is happy. I really think so." Both Ryan and Vivian froze. Caleb sat beside the grave and placed his green dinosaur on the stone. "Here, Mom, you can borrow it. I'm not scared." Ryan bent down and pulled his son close, resting his head on Caleb's shoulder. But his eyes remained on Vivian. She looked back at him, then whispered through a breaking breath, "Ryan, these 3 weeks, I missed you both so much. But I was scared. Scared that those feelings were wrong. Scared I was betraying Lillian." She held his gaze, no longer avoiding anything. "But today, seeing Caleb, seeing you, seeing everything Lillian left behind, I know one thing." Ryan asked softly. "What thing?" Vivian touched the stone again, her voice strong yet shattered. "Lillian wants us to live, Ryan. Not be stuck, not punish ourselves, but truly live." The words floated into the air like a key unlocking the door both of them had feared opening. Ryan looked at Vivian for a long moment, not with the eyes of a man losing control, but with the eyes of someone who understood that, from today onward, things could begin again. Not recklessly, not wrongly, but through healing. The wind rustled gently through the maple leaves above them. Sunlight spilled across the stone like a soft smile. And in that moment, they both felt the same truth. Lily had never left them. She was guiding them forward, quietly, peacefully. A light breeze drifted in from the lake, sending a maple leaf falling between the three of them like a gentle message from the past. Vivian was still kneeling before Lily's grave, her trembling hand resting on the cold stone. Ryan stood beside her, his expression sad yet calmer than it had been before. Both of them felt something had shifted. Not an ending, not a beginning, but a subtle change inside their hearts. Caleb wrapped his arms around Vivian's leg, pressing his cheek to her knee in innocent comfort. Vivian placed her hand on the boy's hair, her eyes filled with a tenderness she didn't even realize she was showing. She tilted her head and asked softly, "Do you miss your mom, Caleb?" The boy nodded, very gently, then said something that made both adults freeze. "Mom told me not to be sad anymore. She said, I don't only have Mom, I have Dad, and Aunt Vivian, too." Ryan turned toward his son, his heart tightening with emotion. Vivian covered her mouth, tears spilling into her hand, but not entirely from pain this time. There was something softer, warmer, a small spark of hope slipping through like sunlight through thick leaves. A moment later, all three stood up. Ryan brushed a leaf off his shoulder and looked at Vivian with rare sincerity. "Thank you for coming. Both Caleb and I needed this." Vivian took a breath, eyes lowering to her shoes as if searching for the right words. "Ryan, I needed this too. Maybe I needed it even more than you." They strolled toward the parking lot. Caleb held both their hands, one on each side, chatting happily about the clouds drifting across the sky. Ryan and Vivian didn't speak, but their silence was no longer distant. It felt like quiet harmony, the kind shared by two people who had stood at the edge of something dangerous and had stepped back to find safer ground. As they neared the cars, Caleb tugged Ryan's hand and asked, full of childlike excitement, "Dad, can we eat lunch with Aunt Vivian?" Ryan stopped, blinking. Vivian stood beside him, head slightly bowed, as if waiting for him to decline. She knew how thin the line between them was. She knew one wrong step could break everything they had just begun to heal. But Ryan didn't refuse immediately. He lifted his gaze to her. Vivian lifted hers too, her eyes still swollen from crying, but filled with gentleness and honesty. In that moment, Ryan understood something. What he felt for Vivian wasn't wrong. However, it was also not something that should lead them. Not now. Not while their wounds were still open. He knelt in front of Caleb, resting a hand on his son's shoulder. "Caleb, I think today we should have lunch together." Caleb bounced with joy, and Vivian, for 1 second she stood still, as though those words had touched the deepest, locked-away part of her heart, the part she had sealed ever since Lillian disappeared. Ryan rose to his feet, but his voice was low, slow, and steady. "But," he added, looking toward Vivian, "if we keep seeing each other, it has to be slow, okay? No rushing, no confusion, no letting pain make the decisions." Vivian nodded immediately, almost with relief. "I understand. I think being friends is what's right for now." Ryan let out a breath of a laugh, soft as a whisper. "Friends is good." Vivian looked at him, and for the first time in 3 weeks, a genuine smile formed on her lips. Not forced, not guarded, but the smile of someone stepping out of a long darkness into a gentle light. Light soft enough to begin again. Caleb held both their hands and pulled them along as if he had found his family again. The lake breeze swept past them, carrying the scent of cool water and maple blossoms. And if anyone were watching from afar, they would say this looked like a family. Not perfect, not complete, but learning to live again with love. When they got into their cars, Vivian closed her door and leaned her head gently against the seat. She glanced toward Ryan, who was fastening Caleb's seatbelt, and quietly thought, "Lillian, if you could see this, would you smile?" Ryan started his car. Vivian followed behind. And on the road toward lunch, none of them knew what the future would hold. But one thing was clear. They were no longer lost. That lunch took place in a small lakeside restaurant where expansive glass windows opened toward the shimmering water under Seattle's summer noon. Ryan chose a seat by the window, and Caleb sat between them, eating chicken bites while excitedly talking about his class, about the green dinosaur he carried everywhere like a treasure. Vivian listened to every word, nodding, smiling, sometimes letting out a soft laugh when Caleb said something adorable. None of them mentioned the 3 weeks of silence, or the dangerous moment in the room full of keepsakes. They didn't need to. Both were trying to begin again, carefully, sincerely, like people learning to step across thin ice, knowing that beneath it waited truth and love, waiting to be rediscovered. Ryan ate less than usual, but for the first time in many weeks, his heart didn't feel unbearably heavy. He watched Vivian cutting food for Caleb, her hands skilled yet trembling just slightly, enough for him to realize he wasn't the only one afraid of making a wrong move. Both were trying to keep their breath from being pulled by emotions too large. As the meal neared its end, Caleb grabbed a napkin and scribbled a little drawing. 3 people are standing under the maple tree at the cemetery. He handed the paper to Vivian. "Aunt Vivian, you keep this, okay? This is you.
This is Dad. This is me. And this is Mom.
Vivian paused as she took the napkin. She looked at the childish drawing, 4 figures standing together wearing simple, bright smiles, as if Caleb had sketched a future he truly believed in. Her lips tightened, her eyes reddened, but this time, she didn't cry.
Thank you, Caleb,
she said, her voice so gentle Ryan couldn't help but glance over.
I'll keep it as something very important.
Caleb nodded, then turned to Ryan.
Dad, will Aunt Vivian eat with us again later?
Ryan looked at Vivian. Vivian looked at Ryan. No complicated dialogue needed. No promises. Ryan gave a small, genuine smile, one he hadn't felt capable of since losing Lily. If she wants to, then yes. Vivian lowered her gaze, though a smile lingered at the corner of her lips.
I'd like that. But let's be friends first. Slowly. Gently.
Ryan replied, Slow is fine. What matters is we're not running anymore. Lunch ended in a weightless calm, as if the 3 of them were emerging from a long season of grief to relearn how to appreciate ordinary moments. When they stood, Caleb grabbed both their hands like he had that morning, lifting them and swinging them back and forth. Vivian laughed. Ryan laughed. And in that brief but genuine moment, both shared the same thought. Perhaps this is precisely how Lily wanted them to continue. Not replacing one another, not erasing the past, but moving forward with kindness and respect for what remains. Before leaving, Ryan turned to Vivian. I don't know where this will go, but thank you for today. Vivian held his gaze for a long time, then spoke in a warm, steady voice he had never heard from her before. Ryan, some losses can never be filled, but there are people who appear just to help us carry them more lightly. Those words made Ryan fall still, a sentence powerful enough to linger in anyone's heart. They said goodbye at the parking lot. Vivian bent down to kiss Caleb's forehead before opening her car door. Caleb hugged her tightly.
Aunt Vivian, don't disappear again, okay?
Vivian held him close.
No, sweetheart, I won't disappear.
When both cars pulled away from the restaurant, the road ahead was filled with sunlight. A strangely peaceful scene. Ryan checked his rear-view mirror. The sight of Vivian's car following behind, not too close, not too far, was enough to tell him. They were heading in the same direction. And for the first time in many weeks, Ryan felt he could breathe fully again. Life sometimes sends us wandering far, only so we can understand that love never disappears. It only changes form, shifts shape, and returns in ways we never expect. If this story touched you, don't forget to leave a like, a comment, or share it so we can continue spreading healing stories like this. And if you want to follow more emotional journeys, subscribe to Deep Life Tales. We have many more stories to share with you.